Good morning, legislators. We're here at the Montana Legislative Services Division, all of us working from home, as I hope most of you are as well. We're going to try something new today. We want to let you know that we're still working and that state government is still working. And so we're going to do a brief video, talk about our agencies and some of the topics that we cover. There's going to be summaries of what we talk about posted online, so you can have links to phone numbers and websites for people to call. But as always, your first call should be to us if you have a question. We will do our best we can to answer it. We're all answering emails, all of our phones are forwarded, and we can still get you in touch with anyone you need to speak with about any sort of question you might have. So I'm going to go over the agencies covered by the Environmental Quality Council, which is my interim committee, and it's the agencies that they have oversight of. That's going to be FWP, DEQ, and DNRC. So kind of the idea of what we're going to talk about here today is what's changed. I think what we're basically talking about is government is running as usual, except for a few things. So for instance, FWP, you can still get your licenses online. Hunting seasons are still planned to take place. Hunters are being advised to watch yourselves if you're in group camps. 6 people or more, stay away from each other. Their FWP is urging people to ask for landowner permission by phone or online. Don't go knocking on people's doors to ask for permission. State parks are all still open. However, there's no overnight camping. You can also expect that some of the bathrooms will probably be closed and not maintained. The aquatic invasive species check stations will still be up and running. The boat inspectors will try and stay 6 feet away from boat owners. The inspections will be logged, but they won't be physically handing you a tag. Game wardens are still going to be out and about, so it's not really the time to start breaking any fish and game laws. If you are arrested, they will be disinfecting their handcuffs, so that can give you some comfort. I'll move on to DEQ. DEQ, most of their offices are closed. Almost the entire agency is teleworking. Business as usual is going on, except for exams for the operators of water and wastewater systems are being suspended until they can figure out how to do that. They are posting some training online. Non-essential inspections for landfills are being suspended. They are still going to be checking compliance reports and other data that they have to make sure that landfills are still operating safely. DEQ will still conduct a number of public meetings. They have a number of meetings that are going to be subject to the Montana Environmental Policy Act and some public participation. However, most of those meetings will be online or by phone. Lastly, DNRC, Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. Again, most of the agency is teleworking or in the field, as they usually are. Check the website. Deadlines for some of the grant application programs are being extended. Fire season is coming up. Fire season waits for no pandemic. So the agency is training firefighters on how to fight fires in relation to staying away from each other, how they're going to do camps, those kinds of things. Leases on state lands are due. However, for home sites such as cabin sites, the department is recognizing Governor Bullock's order and is not going to be calling for those leases until at least June if they're not paid. Most of the agriculture leases have been already paid before the shutdown occurred. And the commercial leases, there is one lease that was having a hard time because it supported a business that was closed. So the agency is working with that commercial lessee. The department also kept track on the Idaho earthquake that some of you may have felt. What they did was they looked at the seismic data from that earthquake and checked it against criteria for the dams in Montana and found that none of the dams were affected to the extent that they needed to be physically inspected. With that, that concludes my agencies, and I'm going to pass it on to Sue O'Connell, who is our expert in everything public health and human services.
Well, there's the first glitch in our electronic meetings. I forgot to unmute myself. Thanks, Joe. The impacts of the coronavirus are hitting the Department of Public Health and Human Services from many different directions, and it started well before the first cases were confirmed in Montana. In January, the department's Public Health and Safety Division ramped up its public health preparedness efforts as more information about the spread of the disease elsewhere in the world was becoming available. That division began working with the Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and with county and tribal public health departments and healthcare providers to get ready for the virus's arrival in Montana. The early efforts focused on technical support to the local departments, on public education and outreach, and on other preparedness efforts. The division also operates the state public health laboratory, and that laboratory has been doing the bulk of coronavirus testing in Montana. After the first cases were confirmed in the state, the lab began around-the-clock testing every day of the week. It also started picking up test samples from another 22 sites around the state to get them to the lab more quickly. So the lab now has a courier service picking up samples from 36 locations in the state. And when it needs to, it has the highway patrol officers and regional gambling control division folks from the Department of Justice transport samples as well. As of this morning, the lab had processed almost 6,800 tests. That public health division is also the conduit for federal preparedness and public health funding, and it disbursed more than $2.5 million last month from the first federal coronavirus bill. That money went to county and tribal health departments around the state. On another front, and as Joe mentioned, many state agencies, including DPHHS, have closed a lot of their walk-in offices. So the agency is delivering those services by phone, mail, or electronic means now. The agency's closures went into effect on March 20th for offices of public assistance, which help people apply for Medicaid, food benefits, and other assistance programs, for the Child Support Enforcement Services Division, which helps parents collect child support, for the office that oversees certain vocational services offered to disabled or blind individuals, for the office that issues birth and death certificates, and for the office that serves people receiving community-based developmental disability services. The agency is still doing child abuse and neglect investigations, and its caseworkers continue to work with families who are involved in open abuse, neglect, and foster care cases. But the agency has eliminated in-person visits between children who have been removed from their homes and their parents. Those visits are now being done through electronic means, if they're being done at all. The agency also has eliminated visitation at its state facilities, such as the Montana State Hospital. It does, however, continue to work and give out a lot of guidance to its many, many stakeholders. And it does have a specific COVID-19 webpage that contains lots of information and lots of answers to frequently asked questions. That page can be reached by clicking on the large COVID-19 icon on the department's homepage, which is www.dphhs.mt.gov. And even when the coronavirus situation begins to ease in Montana, the agency is likely to be responding to the after effects for months to come. Montanans who lose their jobs or who have a significant reduction in income because of the closure of non-essential businesses may end up qualifying for Medicaid, for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is also known as SNAP, or for other public assistance programs. And the second and third coronavirus bills passed by Congress recognize those potential effects and appropriated money to address them. For example, the federal matching funds for the traditional non-expansion Medicaid program will increase by 6.2% in states that agree to two conditions. They have to allow enrollees to remain covered through the duration of the public health emergency, and they can't put stricter eligibility standards into place. Montana's federal matching rate will increase to about 71% during that public health emergency period. So the federal government will be paying 71% of the medical claims filed during that time. The federal bills also bolstered food assistance programs. They appropriated more money for SNAP, as well as for the commodities program that distributes certain foods around the state, particularly to food banks and other entities. And they also put more money for WIC into that program, or into the bills. And that program is the food program for pregnant women, infants, and young children. The bills also suspend the work requirement for able-bodied SNAP recipients who don't have dependent children. The bills also put more money into a lot of other services, including community health centers, which serve uninsured and underinsured people and medically underserved areas, into community mental health programs, into programs that serve elderly and disabled people in their homes or their communities, and into other federal programs and block grants that provide people with social services and emergency assistance, such as help paying their utility bills. All of that money will be funneled through DPHHS in the coming months, and the agency is likely to see an influx in applications for its services as well. So that's really a brief overview of the multiple impacts on DPHHS. I'll turn this over now to Rachel Weiss, who will discuss the impacts on corrections and the judicial branch. Rachel?
Thanks, Sue. As Sue mentioned, I'll review the work of the judicial branch as well as changes in service from the Department of Corrections, the Department of Justice, and the Office of the State Public Defender. The Montana court system has continued to operate during the pandemic, albeit with some visible changes. The Chief Justice of the Montana Supreme Court, Mike McGrath, has issued a series of memos and orders starting in early March. And those writings provide guidance to the courts as well as the public as what might be expected from the court system. He did stress that the courts have a unique and important role in maintaining a civil society, so closing the courts entirely is really not an option. However, all civil and criminal jury trials are suspended until April 10th, unless a criminal trial is ongoing. In that case, the trial may continue unless the defendant has agreed to the delay. Most non-emergency civil matters have also been continued unless they can be conducted without in-person appearances. The courts are placing priority on criminal matters, orders of protection, and child abuse and neglect cases, while attempting to minimize as much as possible any in-person contacts related to hearings, meetings, travel, and payment of any financial obligations. The Chief Justice's March 27th order set out many of these parameters, and that order will extend automatically at any point should the governor extend his stay-at-home directive. The Department of Corrections has also made changes to its operations, including suspending most transfers into facilities unless certain conditions have been met. One of those conditions is a 14-day quarantine of any inmate who must be transferred, and then also limiting any transfers to those that are deemed to be really absolutely necessary. Other visits to secure facilities have been suspended, with the department asking attorneys to use electronic means as much as possible to visit with their clients about ongoing criminal matters. Staff, offenders, and others who have to enter a Department of Corrections facility are screened for inspection, and inmates are tested for the virus as appropriate, determined by CDC guidelines. And the department continues to work with the Department of Public Health and Human Services to coordinate its health responses to the pandemic. Each inmate has been provided with one free phone call and one free video call each week. And the department is also coordinating with the Board of Pardons and Parole to identify any offenders who might be appropriate for parole. In terms of supervising offenders who are released into the community on probation, parole, or conditional release, those probation and parole officers are limiting in-person contacts as much as possible, such as in-office check-ins. And they are also conducting their pre-sentence investigations by phone. These are the investigations of defendants who are still awaiting sentencing on criminal charges. And as of April 2nd, the department had screened 3 inmates for COVID-19, and all 3 of those tests had come back negative for the virus. The Department of Justice continues its regular work, as well as completing some work created by this pandemic situation. It has received 14 price gouging complaints as of April 1st. And the Attorney General's office also has issued open meetings guidance to local governments who still need to hold meetings while complying with the governor's stay-at-home order. One change in service is that the department has limited its fingerprinting services to 3 days of the week. and is only running those fingerprint checks for critical infrastructure workers, such as nursing license applicants, childcare workers, first responders, and individuals who provide some type of housing for children in abuse and neglect proceedings. Information related to Real ID changes and the Motor Vehicle Division will be given later in this video by Sonia Nowakowski. And finally, at the Office of the State Public Defender, most attorneys are trying to telework, but some offices have still remained open and are practicing social distancing. In addition to regular caseloads, the attorneys are filing motions in local courts to ask that certain clients be released from detention in local jails. These individuals include those who are at a higher risk of serious health complications from a COVID-19 infection, and also those individuals who are charged with or might have been convicted of a nonviolent offense. The release process depends highly on the jurisdiction. In a limited number of areas, the prosecutor and OPD defense attorneys have agreed on a list of people to release. In most, however, individuals are considered on a case-by-case basis, with the courts considering motions filed by public defenders. The office is using text messages and email as much as possible to communicate with clients about cases and to notify them of scheduling changes. The OPD managers continue to monitor caseloads and will be analyzing how those caseloads could be affected by the ongoing pandemic. More information on all these agencies is available on the written report online, including links to each agency and the information that they are providing to the public. So with that, I'll turn it over to Pad McCracken, who is the staff for the Education Interim Committee, and his updates on the education policy world. Pad?
Greetings. I'll start off with an update from the Board of Regents and the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education, otherwise known as OCHE. Courses at university system campuses are being delivered remotely to students for the remainder of this semester. And only a small number of students remain living on campus. Those students who had no other alternative for housing are living on campus and utilizing dining services. Otherwise, refunds for room and board have been provided to all students exiting the dorms. OCHE is providing guidance, directives, and communications to campuses system-wide on topics related to remote delivery of courses, the on-campus living arrangements, the room and board refunds, telework options for employees, hiring moratoriums, and the rescheduling or redesigning of spring 2020 commencement ceremonies in order to follow state and federal limits on large gatherings. Like I said, there's a hiring moratorium suspending new hires and searches in effect across the system until further notice, but the Office of the Commissioner is working with campuses on exceptional exceptions to that. Employees who can work from home are all working from home with regular communication between supervisors. Also, the Commissioner's Office is directing a statewide mental health and wellness campaign for students faced with new living and learning challenges, and coordinating campus communications to make sure that there's consistent and accurate messaging on the university system. Moving now to the Board of Public Education, you may know that's our smallest state agency with about 2.5 FTE. They are all working from home. They're working on hiring a new superintendent for the School for the Deaf and Blind in Great Falls, where the board's next meeting is scheduled to take place May 7th and 8th. The board held a conference call on March 27th to waive statewide testing requirements for K-12 schools this spring. The Office of Public Instruction, or OPI, as you know, public schools in Montana are closed to in-person instruction. So it's remote learning statewide for all K-12 students. Nearly all staff at OPI are teleworking. There's a few exceptions for the finance director, the health and safety director, the chief data officer, and several of Superintendent Arnson's personal staff. OPI is collaborating with the governor's office and education groups to provide guidance and clarify expectations for school districts. OPI is maintaining an excellent COVID-19 webpage with frequent updates, frequently asked questions to support school districts through this. The office is also hosting conference calls and Zoom meetings with district leaders to answer their questions and offering remote learning resources to educators. They're also tracking federal action and funding and preparing to implement distribution of funds from the CARES Act, which total roughly $40 million in one of the buckets of funding for education. And they have posted preliminary estimates of what those distributions to districts will be. The Historical Society is closed to the public. All programs are canceled. Most employees are working remotely. Just a skeleton crew remains in the building. Thanks to the digital resources they've developed in recent years, they're allowing great access to their collections digitally. And the Historical Society is encouraging Montanans to stay connected in a number of ways and making resources available to support learning at home, including an excellent quarantine activities webpage. The Heritage Center planning and design continues to proceed via remote means. The Montana Arts Council, all staff is working remotely or at scheduled times in the office to maintain social distancing. The grants that they administer for 2020 are being adjusted as needed to reflect programming cancellations, and the grant cycles for fiscal year 2021 are also being adjusted. They're preparing as well to administer stimulus funding made available through the National Endowment for the Arts as part of the CARES Act. And they're in the process of filling one vacant position. State Library is closed. They're fully operational via their online services and only support minimal walk-in traffic anyway. They're keeping one manager on premises along with staff for the Talking Book Library to continue distributing those materials. All employees are carrying out their normal job duties. The State Library Commission held an online meeting on April 1st, and the State Library has developed a COVID-19 story map with daily updated information and resources. A lot of web links in the document that will be posted online. And now I will turn it over to Pat Murdo, who will speak to you about agencies and offices associated with the Economic Affairs Interim Committee.
Hi, Pat Murdo with Economic Affairs Committee. We have 9 agencies, and so I'll try to go through them very quickly. State Auditor's Office has all but about 6 people that are working remotely and maintaining operations. The State Auditor's Office has released information on what health insurers are doing in terms of telemedicine and handling testing for COVID-19 under their insurance policies. The commissioner also has released warnings about scams that are arising with COVID-19. The Department of Agriculture has about 70% of its staff working at home, but they are maintaining operations. The director, Ben Thomas, points out that most of the problems with, or most of the impacts from agriculture are markets and weather, and so they are able to continue their operations. Testing is continuing at the grain lab and the analytical lab, except for some testing that is required by the federal government to be suspended. The Alcoholic Beverage Control Division in the Department of Revenue is working remotely for its licensing and compliance folks, but the warehouse is continuing. The department and the ABC division is wanting to make people aware that agency liquor stores are still open. This is important across the country, apparently. And but however, the taverns and restaurants with beer and wine licenses are closed, except for those that are serving for takeout. There has been some lightening of regulations related to the alcohol industry, they have been able to make home deliveries of alcohol. The brewers in particular are allowing growlers to be delivered. And there are no fingerprinting activities going on for new licenses. There's no projection yet on lost revenues. The department also is allowing brewers and distillers to make hand sanitizer. Department of Commerce, as you may expect, has lots of activities related that they are monitoring. The census is one of their key issues, and April 1st was Census Day. The department is making sure that people they are promoting the online response to questionnaires. The data as of April 2nd showed that Montana had 33.1% compliance, whereas the national average was 41.3%. So they are extending some of the deadlines for response to the census, but they expect to be able to report to the president as required on December 31st. Economic development aspects, they are helping with businesses to apply for the grants and loans available through the SBA. Housing has posted the information from the governor's executive order related to evictions and foreclosures. They also are pointing out that mortgages are still to be paid if people can pay them, or they should try to get some forbearance from their lenders to spread the amount of time out for your mortgages if you are impacted. The tourism, they are monitoring the tourism. The Institute for Tourism and Research and Recreation and Research did a survey in mid-March that found that 36% of people had already canceled their reservations with the Montana travel industry, the hosts and hotels, and 30% of outfitters reported that have been cancellations. The department is looking at trying to promote more locally, but they are monitoring that situation. The Montana Facility Finance Authority, which is connected to the Department of Commerce, they have received some of the governor's emergency declarations, and they are able to offer emergency loans. The governor suspended the inability to use the loans from the Montana Facility Finance Authority for operating expenses. So hospitals, which are the main recipients of some of these loans, they are now able to use some of their loans for operating expenses to bridge the period where they may not be having as many regular patients as normal. Department of Labor and Industry also is swamped with some of the phone calls that are coming in. They had more than 480,000 phone calls to their unemployment insurance line. They are processing their unemployment insurance applications. They've pulled 70 people from the job service and from employment relations to work to help the regular unemployment insurance people. It's unclear how many people at the Department of Labor and Industry are working day by day from home versus in the office, but they are trying to staff up and put a lot of attention to the unemployment insurance. They want to notify people that as soon as the information technology responses has been able to set up the new system, that the federal money, which has been granted of $600 a week for people on unemployment, will be sent to people who have applied for unemployment. They can apply in advance. As soon as they are laid off, they are supposed to apply for unemployment, and they will get the money backdated to when the system gets up and running. Some people are eligible for workers' compensation at this time. It tends to be first responders and emergency service people that may have contracted the COVID-19 from their work. The Montana State Fund reports that most of its staff is working at home. They are trying to use telemedicine for claimants, and they have lightened some of the restrictions on reporting so that the benefits can get to people earlier. They've had 4 people that have submitted claims for unemployment or for workers' compensation. They are anticipating payroll cuts, and they have told policyholders that no one will be canceled for lack of payment, at least through the end of June. And they are also hoping to bridge this time by using equity to help their operations. The banking and financial institutions in the Department of Administration has posted the governor's emergency order on evictions and foreclosures, but also note that mortgages are supposed to be paid. They have passed some emergency rules to allow credit unions and banks to have their annual meetings. They are supposed to be in person, but obviously that isn't not happening right now. So they are allowed to do some teleconference calls for their annual meetings. They have also issued emergency rules to lighten the reporting requirements for mortgage and escrow folks. And last but not least, the Governor's Office of Economic Development has provided 4 of its 5 staffs are working at home, and they have shifted to business assistance primarily to help small businesses. Now I will turn it to Trevor Graff and the Public Service Commission report.
Thank you, Pat. The Montana Public Service Commission is continuing with business as usual. However, they are transitioning to virtual video conference for all work sessions, and the staff is working from home. That said, you can still get any of your business requests taken care of at the commission. The phones are forwarded, I'm told, and they will continue on in this remote setting. One notable case before the commission is the Colstrip 4 acquisition with Northwestern. That case still awaits further action from the utility, and I'm told that that will not hamper that schedule. In further COVID-19 response measures, the commission has received several filings relating to utility shutoffs and the waiving of late payment fees. Both Northwestern and Montana Dakota Utilities are waiving late fees and prohibiting shutoffs during the COVID-19 pandemic. One notable addition to that on the Montana Dakota Utilities front, they have filed to suspend their pilot lighting program. That's a program in which the utility provides pilot lighting services to residents on its system. No action has been taken on that filing at this time. Both utilities are reporting sending non-essential staff home and working remotely. They are both implementing social distancing policy for those field workers that are essential and are working on the transmission system and distribution system at this time. Northwestern has also reported an 11% decrease in electric load. This is due largely to the decrease in commercial consumption and commercial demand. Beyond that, the utility is also reporting low electric market prices in the West. So with that, I will turn it over to Jason Moore.
All right, thank you, Trevor. Joe previously covered the broader work of the DEQ, DNRC, and FWP, and I'll focus specifically on the water-related functions of those 3 agencies following what the Water Policy Interim Committee does. And typically that boils down to what the DNRC Water Resources Division and the DEQ's Water Quality Division do. I'll also talk briefly about the Water Court. So Water Resources Division, they plan for, manage, and administer Montana's water. Employees are spread across 5 bureaus and 8 regional offices. Those regional offices are apparently open, although no one is there, and staff is only reachable by phone. 95% of employees at DNRC are working from home, and for the Water Resources Division, that'd be monitoring the state water supply, working on floodplain management plans, and administering new and historical water rights. There's a little field work going on. The division has some engineering and construction contracts for state water projects for the state dams and canals. And as Joe mentioned, they did not need to do inspection of dams after the 6.5 magnitude earthquake in Idaho. The Water Quality Division of the DEQ, their job is to protect water quality. They also implement the Federal Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. They work on water quality standards, pollution permits, and they also importantly regulate drinking water, wastewater, and sanitation systems. Most of their staff is working remotely. They have postponed site inspections. They're relying on existing monitoring and compliance reporting that permittees provide them. And it sounds like field inspections won't happen unless it's an emergency response situation. They have canceled a few things. I think Joe mentioned those, water and wastewater operator exams, and the Montana Rural Water Systems Conference has also been canceled. Montana Water Court operates out of Bozeman. They are processing pre-1973 water rights. Typically their workload are court hearings. A lot of those are held over the phone, but any in-person hearings will not be held, are delayed at least until May 1st. Other than that, they're working on business as usual with their casework, working with the DNRC on any water decrees. The court is open, but they are asking the public to communicate primarily by email and phone. That's what I have. And next is Sonia Nowakowski with the Department of Transportation and the Motor Vehicle Division of the Department of Justice.
Thanks, Jason. Montana's Department of Transportation remains open for business. However, it's not entirely business as usual. Many MDT workers are teleworking where practical. MDT continues to monitor the Highway State Special Revenue Account. The ongoing and expected decline in travel is expected to negatively impact balances in that account, although it's unclear at this time to what degree. The retail fuel community has indicated that gasoline sales are already down about 30%, and they're expected to drop to about half of normal at the peak. Diesel's down about 1% to 2% is all. If the predictions do come to fruition and levels return to normal within the year, a conservative estimate of the impact to the fund is about $35 million, according to the department. This is the number they'll be tracking and making sure the legislature is fully apprised of. The transportation industry is currently considered an essential service, and construction activities, including advertising, letting, and actual construction, continue throughout the state. MDT is ensuring construction activities progress as much as they safely can. Currently, there's little impact to the traveling public due to the impacts from COVID-19. Field maintenance, including personnel, continue to plow roads, fix guardrails, patch bridges and potholes, etc. Traveler information is continually updated and available online, and all year-round rest areas and truck parking areas remain open. In terms of public transportation, federal transit funds continue to flow through MDT to about 40 different providers around Montana. As of March 31st, about 10 rural providers, however, have suspended services, 12 have reduced services to medical only or partial service, and 5 others have further reduced services. The Department of Public Health is also tracking this issue and keeping regular updates for the public. Finally, the MDT district offices are operating with minimal staff in their central offices. Additional information on those offices and impacted services is all posted online. At the Department of Justice's Motor Vehicle Division, as well as many county treasurer's offices, there have been some alterations to general operations to maintain customer service, but to still implement social distancing requirements. The division and related county offices wanted to stress that they remain open for business. Montanans with driver's licenses that expire in March, April, and May can delay renewing those licenses for 90 days. This includes commercial driver's licenses, CDLs as well. Certain requirements for online driver license renewals are also suspended. Montanans who need to renew a driver's license can self-certify their ability to drive instead of submitting the required forms that are usually need to be signed by medical or vision professionals. Dealerships are also being granted a 90-day extension to submit paperwork to county offices. Vehicle owners also have the 90-day extension to title and register vehicles transferred after March 16th. Under the governor's directives, renewals also may be completed online up to 30 days past the month shown on the vehicle's registration tab. The Motor Vehicle Division reminds Montanans that renewals also can be handled online and via the mail. The DOJ website provides information on how to do so. For titling needs, some county offices ask that you call the treasurer's office and schedule an appointment for certain services. MVD also has compiled information by county on special conditions related to services across the state. An overview of all the counties is available on the website. Finally, also on March 26th, President Trump announced that the October 1, 2020 Real ID enforcement date is going to be postponed. With that extension, federal agencies and the Transportation Security Administration will continue to accept your valid Montana driver's license or ID cards to board domestic commercial flights, and also to allow you to access federal facilities until October 1st, 2021. So that's just a quick wrap on the transportation. And with that, I will turn it over to Megan Moore for Department of Revenue and Tax Appeal.
Thanks, Sonia. As Sonia said, I'm going to talk about the Department of Revenue and the Montana Tax Appeal Board. The Department of Revenue continues to operate fairly normally. Most of its employees are working from home, and the agency is able to perform its duties of administering state taxes, distributing revenue, and assessing property values. Pat Murdo gave an update about the Alcohol Beverage Control Division earlier in this video. The Department of Revenue offices in Helena and county property assessment offices throughout the state are closed to the public. However, taxpayers can drop off payments or tax returns in Helena at the Donovan Building foyer during regular business hours, or they can pick up a stamped envelope at the Mitchell Building in order to mail payments or tax returns. There are a small number of employees working at the Donovan Building to process paper income tax returns, and the department is following physical distancing guidelines for those employees. The biggest news in the Department of Revenue's world is that the governor extended the individual income tax filing deadline to from April 15th to July 15th to match the change to the federal income tax deadline. This also affects April quarterly estimated payments, which are also due on July 15th. I'll note that the corporate income tax due dates are unchanged. Most corporations file their taxes at the end of the year, though some do face a May deadline. The other tax deadlines remain in effect. These include deadlines for paying and remitting taxes to the Department of Revenue, and the department is also distributing revenue to local governments, tribal governments, and state accounts as normally scheduled. There is an upcoming May 31st property tax payment deadline. This deadline remains in place. However, the governor issued a March 30th directive that delays the tax lien process during the emergency declaration. This directive prohibits a sheriff's sale on mobile homes for which taxes are delinquent, and tax liens for other residential property are attached in August, so the order may not affect those liens if the emergency declaration is no longer in effect at that point. Property assessment is on track. Department appraisers continue to be out and about assessing property, though they are directed to avoid interaction with people and not to enter occupied properties. Taxable values are expected to be sent to local governments on schedule so that assessment notices can be sent on time. Mobile home and personal property assessment notices are sent in the spring, and those are expected to be on time. The other assessment notices are sent in late summer. Now we'll move on to the Montana Tax Appeal Board. This board hears direct appeals for all taxes and also hears appeals from County Tax Appeal Board hearings, which are appeals of property valuation that occur in the county in which the property is located. The board members of the Montana Tax Appeal Board are still working. without interruption. They're still issuing opinions within 90 days as required by law. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the board held audio hearings, and they continue to make that option available for hearings. Following recommendations issued by the Supreme Court, the board gave taxpayers the option of delaying scheduled hearings or holding audio hearings, and all taxpayers with April hearings chose to delay the hearings. At this time, the board is not rescheduling May and June hearings. The board also granted extensions for 3 county tax appeal boards that are still hearing cases. This allows those county boards to hear cases through the fall of 2020, and the extensions affect about 10 cases. The board also granted an abeyance for a major industrial refinery appeal. Both the Department of Revenue and the taxpayer agreed that under the current circumstances, they couldn't meet the scheduling deadlines for discovery, and expert witnesses are unable to travel for depositions. Finally, I'll note that these delayed hearings affect protested tax funds. Generally, when a taxpayer appeals their property value, they pay their property taxes under protest to avoid penalties and interest. And without these cases being resolved, protested taxes remain in the tax funds. There are some statutory provisions that allow local governments to access a portion of the protested taxes, though there is a bit of risk involved as they must repay the funds if the taxpayer prevails in the appeal. Now I'll turn it over to Sherry Skur, staff for the State Administration and Veterans Affairs Committee.
Thanks, Megan. Yes, I'm a legislative research analyst for the State Administration and Veterans Affairs Committee, and we have oversight over the Department of Military Affairs, including Disaster and Emergency Services and the Montana Veterans Affairs Division, the Department of Administration, the Secretary of State's Office, the Commissioner of Political Practices, and the Public Employee Retirement Systems. The first thing I'm going to cover is the Emergency Response Coordination, which involves multiple agencies. And on March 3rd, 2020, the governor established the COVID-19 Task Force. This is a multi-agency coordinating body that is led by Major General Matthew Quinn. General Quinn is the Adjutant General and head of the Department of Military Affairs. This COVID-19 task force is coordinating the public health response, helping manage continuity of government efforts, and establishing and maintaining lines of communication between state, federal, and local entities. COVID-19 task force members include the Department of Public Health and Human Services Director Sheila Hogan, her Deputy Director Laura Smith, and the State Medical Officer Dr. Greg Holzman. Department of Administration Director John Lewis, Department of Commerce Director Tara Rice, Department of Labor and Industry Commissioner Brendan Nordland, and the Governor's Chief of Staff Allie Bovington and Budget Director Tom Livers. A link to this task force website is prominently displayed on the montana.mt.gov webpage. The Disaster and Emergency Services Division has activated its State Emergency Response Coordination Center, or EOC. This center is collecting and disseminating information in support of city and county efforts to prevent the spread of COVID-19. It is the focal point for the state's emergency response and includes individuals from other state agencies. These other agencies provide the EOC with expertise in information technology and cybersecurity, state finance, human resources, public relations, logistics, and medical services. There is a button on the COVID-19 Task Force webpage that's labeled Get the Latest Updates, and this provides a link to the EOC's dashboard. And this dashboard includes situation updates county by county. The third part of the coordinated emergency response effort is in the Department of Administration's Incident Management Team, which is operating a joint information center. This central center provides a centralized point of information and communication in support of all state agencies, the media, and the private sector vendors who service and supply the state. So circling back now to talk about the rest of the Department of Military Affairs. The Director's Office is coordinating the funding, contracting, HR, and payroll functions for state National Guard members, including those that are called up for state active duty. This includes the activation of 73 National Guard members who are providing medical screenings of people entering Montana at airports, rail stations, and other ports of entry. The Montana Veterans Affairs Division employs the veteran service officers that assist veterans with claims in front of the federal VA. They have instituted a plan for remote work, and they have closed their main office at Fort Harrison. Veteran service officers are using remote electronic communications and continue to help veterans with their claims. The Youth Challenge Program campus has been closed. Program cadre continue to contact the students through electronic communications and provide weekly physical activity direction and coursework instructions through to keep their students engaged. The Star-based elementary school program is closed and staff are working remotely on a summer class plan. Army and Air National Guard construction projects are continuing. So now I'm going to circle back to the Department of Administration. 75% of their staff are working remotely. The State Information Technology Services Division continues to provide support and solutions across all state agencies to accommodate the move to a predominantly remote workforce. The division reports that its network has been capable of handling the increased bandwidth, and the agency is stressing continued diligence in providing education and diligence regarding IT security protocols. The State Human Resources Division continues to issue guidance in a broad array of subjects, including the use of COVID-19 leave available to state employees and applications of standards associated with Families First Coronavirus Response Act and other recent federal legislation that have an impact on payroll and state workforce activities. The Financial Services Division continues to generate payments as normal to include an anticipated high volume of unemployment insurance payments in the coming weeks. Print and mail services staff continue to work on site to keep operations going. The Risk Management Division is evaluating and processing COVID-19 claims for infectious disease cleanup and business income loss on behalf of state agencies and the universities. The department reports that its biggest challenge right now is the call volume, and that seems to be taxing the state's telecommunication infrastructure. They are working through it, and they anticipate they'll be able to handle the additional call challenge. So now I'm going to turn to elections and the Secretary of State's office. So the governor issued an emergency directive about elections on March 25th. Under this directive, the governor waived the statutory deadline for schools to submit plans to the Secretary of State for all mail ballot elections. This allows the schools that had not planned to have on conducting their May 4th school elections by mail to change their elections from a polling place election to mail ballot elections. The directive also allowed counties to choose to conduct the June 2nd primaries by mail. All 56 counties have opted to conduct the June 2nd primary by mail. County governing bodies do have until April 8th to withdraw their all mail ballot election request. County election administrators have been scrambling. They're trying to meet the deadline to submit mail ballot election plans to the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State's office has offered a streamlined form that is helping expedite this process. County election administrators are also working very hard to comply with the governor's directive that early in-person voting must be accommodated for a full 30 days before the election. This addresses concerns about the impact of these all-mail ballot elections on tribal voters in Indian country, as well as those voters with disabilities who may need to access accessible voting machines. Drop-off locations, ballot drop-off locations are also being established, and the county election administrators are working to implement and enforce the physical distancing policies at the in-person voting stations and at the ballot drop box locations. Regarding the election costs, The governor's directive provided that the costs of the return postage on mail ballots are to be paid from available state or federal emergency funds. Under the directive, counties may seek reimbursement from the Department of Administration for their return postage costs. The Local Government Services Division of the Department of Administration is the lead agency and will assist counties in their reimbursement requests. The governor's directive also stated that the counties may seek additional reimbursements from the federal government or the Secretary of State's office if federal emergency assistance is made available. The Federal CARES Act will provide Montana with about $3 million to, quote, prepare for and respond to the coronavirus in the 2020 federal election cycle, unquote. Other details of election funding are still being worked out. You know, regarding the other services of the Secretary of State's office, that office remains open to the public, and it continues to provide uninterrupted business, administrative, rule, and records services. However, most of the staff are conducting business with customers from home, while 6 staff do remain in the office on site. The Commissioner of Political Practices office has not implemented any changes to campaign reporting deadlines. However, the office has received some requests for extensions on those, and those requests are being handled on an individual case-by-case basis. So turning now to the public employee retirement plans, the Montana Public Employees Retirement Administration reports that it has successfully implemented its telework plan, and there has been virtually no interruption in services to pension plan members or participating employers. There is a public call and email center, and employers are also able to reach the employer call center for assistance with payroll contributions and answering questions. The agency's essential operations involve reviewing, finalizing, and paying retirement benefits, disability benefits, and hardship withdrawals. Regarding the special pension risk analysis and stress test report, this report was requested as part of the legislative finance study. And the executive director, Dory Schwinden, reports that this analysis will be available, hopefully, to legislative staff, hopefully this week, April 6th through April 10th. The Public Employee Retirement Board meetings have been postponed until further notice. The Teachers Retirement System reports that 17 of its 21 employees are working remotely until further notice, and that they are staggering staff coming into the office to ensure continuity of workflow. They expect to have processed 600 new retirement applications between the period of March 1st through June 30th. They have rescheduled all their in-person counseling sessions into virtual teleconference meetings beginning March 18th. And 4 of their staff members do work in the office and are not working remotely, including the executive director. Monthly retirement benefits and daily deposits to retirement plan contributions are proceeding as normal. And also, as mentioned, they will have their risk analysis stress test report that should be ready and available to legislative staff this week. The annual actuarial valuations for the public pension plans will be conducted as usual and will cover the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2020. These valuations will include a very dramatic, the dramatic investment losses that have been incurred since the onset of the COVID-19 crisis. SAVA will be monitoring this and we'll be receiving these valuations probably by mid to late October. And this concludes my portion of the briefing, and I'll turn it over to Tony Hinman, who will cover our local government.
Thank you, Sherry. Yeah, so a couple of different local government updates. Many local governments across the state have really seen some pretty drastic changes and challenges to their operations. And the first thing I'll mention is the local health departments. These health departments have been pretty much the front lines for implementing and enforcing the governor's executive orders and directives. So they have been very important and have had a lot of responsibility through this emergency. And luckily they have been aided by the Department of Emergency Services and then also the Public Emergency Preparedness Division of DPHHS. So in addition to those agencies helping, two organizations have been really important as well, the Montana Association of Counties and the Montana League of Cities and Towns. And these two organizations have really been working on trying to maintain consistency for local governments across the state, helping local governments implement these changes that are coming pretty quickly and repeatedly, and then also advocating for additional changes that might be necessary in the future. And one of those changes that they advocated for was the directive that the governor gave on March 24th that allowed additional flexibility for local governments. And this is important because there were many statutorily mandated requirements for local governments, such as maintaining office hours, that became less than reasonable to maintain social distancing. So this directive allows local governments to change at their own discretion who comes into work, who can work remotely, and then what office hours actually look like. Also allows for the modification of vacation and sick leave policy for local governments. And that just allows these local government employees to have similar benefits afforded them as other public employees currently are able to receive due to these changes that have occurred. One other thing that the Local Government Flexibility Directive also allowed was some discretion on different timelines that local governments are usually, again, statutorily mandated to adhere to. And the specific list of these timelines will be included in the directive, which I'll include within the companion document that will be with this video. But some of those timelines include like the annexation of land, how cities and counties can pass ordinances and resolutions, the publication of meeting minutes, and then also some timelines related to property development and subdivision review requirements. And it is worth noting that the flexibility of those timelines will go back to strict adherence once this emergency declaration is lifted. So that's just for now, and it will allow those local governments to focus more on items that are a priority in the moment. Another change that has happened for local governments is the way that they actually conduct business. As I mentioned, a lot of these local governments saw a lot of changes that had to be implemented pretty quickly. And public meetings became kind of an issue because having a lot of people in one area went against social distancing regulations. So cities and counties had to be pretty quick and flexible. Most of them jumped on virtual meetings. And just for some clarification, there was a document released called the Guidelines for Conducting Local Public Meetings during the COVID-19 emergency, which laid out some basic guidelines. I think Rachel mentioned this. But just to ensure that they were within their requirements, the attorney for Custer County, the city of Bozeman, and then the League of Montana Cities and Towns requested an opinion from the Attorney General. And the Attorney General did go ahead and say, yes, those guidelines would in fact meet the requirements for public participation. And this is important because public participation is constitutionally protected in the Montana Constitution. And as long as these cities and counties are allowing a broadcast meeting and then also allowing the public to submit maybe email, written comment, that they are then meeting those requirements. And most state agencies have used these guidelines, as will the legislature as well. I know a lot of interim committee meetings are going to be conducted virtually, possibly in the future, and those guidelines will be used as well. And lastly, local governments have really been worried about funding, which is obviously a pretty significant concern. Earlier in March, Sue had mentioned that there was some funding that came from the Centers of Disease Control. And this was given to local governments and tribal governments based on a population calculation. And this money is to be used expressly for preparedness against the COVID-19 emergency. And that money was allocated to local health departments. So those departments will be the ones that would then disperse that money. And the money also goes through the DPHHS Public Emergency Preparedness Division. In addition to that funding, obviously the Federal Stimulus Act, also known as the CARES Act, has a large package of funding that might be available. In the bill, there is a requirement that any local government unit of 500,000 people or more can receive direct funding from the U.S. Department of Treasury. Now, the state of Montana has no local government units that meet that population requirement. So what most likely is going to happen, and again, this will take additional analysis, which will hopefully come in the future, but it looks like the state of Montana will receive the entire funding, which will be $1.25 billion. And then it will be allocated after that. Again, we need to have a lot more analysis and see how that will actually allocate money to local governments, but I do know that local governments are very concerned and are watching that very closely to see how that money will come down to them. There are a couple of restrictions on the money that will go to local governments. It obviously needs to be used for purposes related to the COVID-19 emergency. It also can be used for unbudgeted expenditures that have happened during this period. And the money needs to be spent between March 1st of 2020 and December 31st of 2020. So I know that that is something that all local government officials are watching and going to see how that will actually come to fruition, and will be something that we will be watching very closely as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Hope Stockwell, who will give an update on state tribal relations.
Thanks, Tony. As lead staff for the State Tribal Relations Committee, I have a brief roundup about how agencies are adapting their work in Indian country in response to COVID-19. The Governor's Office of Indian Affairs held an interagency call with all of the tribal governments and is routinely communicating with the tribal incident command centers. At DPHHS, you heard a lot about their work from Sioux. Specific to Indian country, the agency is doing a lot of phone outreach with tribal entities on reservations as well as in urban areas, and then also with the Indian Health Service. It's discussing telemedicine and telehealth policy changes with those groups, as well as distributing personal protective equipment to them. DPHHS also stood up a tribal-specific COVID-19 webpage that you can find at the same site Sue gave you, dphhs.mt.gov, and there's a button to click on the tribal page. The agency is also sending major directives from the governor that are coming out during this crisis directly to tribal partners to ensure there's direct communication. And the agency is also participating in national calls in which federal agencies are looking for feedback from tribes on how monies in federal stimulus packages should be allocated and distributed in Indian country. Switching to the Department of Commerce, they operate multiple economic development grant programs in Indian country. Staff there sent out a survey to grantees to assess if anyone was going to have difficulty completing contracts that expire in May. And as a result, they are working to extend 15 grants in Indian country into next fiscal year. The State Tribal Economic Development Commission had a strategic planning session planned for early May in Browning that has been postponed indefinitely. And the department also delayed filming for tribal tourism videos from March to July, August, hoping they can be accomplished then. The department is also using a program called DocuSign so that tribal officials can get notification of incoming contracts and sign those documents via a smartphone rather than having to be at a computer and logged into an email to help facilitate those business processes. Pat mentioned the census response earlier. In Indian country, the self-response rate is much lower than the rest of the state. The whole state self-response rate is about 36% this morning. In counties that contain reservations, it ranges from 7% to 17%. The exception is Lake County, where the self-response rate is almost 26%. So there's concern about getting the word out in getting self-response boosted in Indian country. At the Office of Public Instruction, the Indian Education for All staff is offering support to teachers via online learning forums. They're also retooling some of their Indian Education for All lessons. That way, instead of being teacher facilitated, they can be used independently by students who are at home if they have online access. Although OPI knows that is a problem, especially in Indian country, having the internet, but also then a computing device at home to use. And in other news, in my role as staff for the Environmental Policy Office, I provide periodic training on the Montana Environmental Policy Act for state employees. And we had a 2-day training scheduled for last week. We transitioned it to online delivery via this platform, Zoom. We had 70 employees participate both days, and it really turned out pretty well. We were very pleased. My thanks to Trevor Graff for helping with that. He helped administer it, and I couldn't have done it without him. So in other big news, my daughter turned 1 yesterday, so that's a very high note for us to end on. And I'll turn it back to Sonia.
I just want to wrap up and thank everybody for providing those updates, and thank the agencies for taking time out of their busy schedules to help us coordinate this information so we can get it out to the legislators. Again, it's a very dynamic situation and we are trying to keep up to date. Please feel free to contact us anytime if you're looking for additional information. We will have some written materials to accompany this recording on the website as well with more details, those websites. And again, just wrapping up, please feel free to reach out to your researchers if you need anything, and thank you for your time.